Do you hear any background sound, Tolu?
No, not from you. What about from me?
Um,
Can you
no,
hear me clearly?
yeah, I can hear it fine.
Okay, sounds good.
All right. Good morning, everyone. It is just about 10 o'clock, so I will go ahead and get started with today's introduction. Thank you so much, and welcome to Robotic Process Automation, RPA, Use Cases in Finance. We're so glad that we're still able to bring you the full ICPAS learning experience in a virtual format. My name is Brittany Douglas, and I am the Education Operations Coordinator here at the Illinois CPA Society. So I'll be here today to help you with any technical issues that you might have. So feel free to message me in the chat or privately if you need any assistance. For today's CPE tracking, there will be automated tracking questions that will pop up on your screen throughout the course of the webinar. So when that icon appears, please click the icon, and when it disappears, that means that your response has been recorded. You'll need to answer at least 75% of those tracking questions to receive your full CPE credit for today. If you want to ask any questions during the webinar, please use the Q&A feature to the right of your screen right next to the chat. And also, if you like to follow along with the presentation today, you can find that in the handouts tab next to the chat as well. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speakers for today, Tolu and Sangita from RGP. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'll turn it over to you.
Hello, good morning, all. Greetings from the windy city of Chicago to the members here in Chicago and to you from wherever you may be joining from. My name is Tolu Akin. I am a senior director in the finance transformation practice of RGP. In our practice, we are focused on helping clients achieve optimized finance delivery model by leveraging technology solutions such as robotic process automation and Blackline technologies, among others. We also deliver process-enabled optimization, including global business services, otherwise known as shared services. On the webinar today with me is my colleague, Sangita.
Hello, everybody. Good morning. I'm part of Tolu's team, also senior director in the finance transformation office, and pretty much um, support across all the transformations that we drive. And I'm based out of Silicon Valley, but today I'm here joining you all from India.
Great. Next slide, please. What is today's agenda? Now that we're done with introductions, let's have a quick run through of today's agenda. We are going to start off with a background introduction of robotic process automation. Here, we're going to address some foundational terms and definitions that are germane to robotic process automation. Next, we evaluate technology solution options and then advance into a review of representative RPA use cases and client case study examples. We will then conclude with automation roadmap and organizational readiness and change management. Next slide, please. Next slide. So what is robotic process automation? It is technology that uses software robots to perform tasks that humans usually do on computers, such as data entry, form filling, or file moving. So essentially, any activity that a human being is able to do in front of a computer using keyboard, keystrokes, and mouse movement, RPA is able to replicate this activity. So RPA really has evolved over the years. I was actually quite fortunate around the early 2010, 2011 to witness some of the early adoption of RPA. So really RPA came about as a result of desire to achieve additional efficiency gains from business process outsourcing organizations, which are pretty much outsourced to low-cost markets like Philippines and India. But then the labor arbitrage, which was really the reason for migrating to these low-cost markets, suddenly started becoming non-existent as there were pressure for wage growth increases in these markets. And because most of those business process outsourcing organizations were tied into fixed rate contracts, they had to figure out a way to still keep making money. So essentially, they started developing the homegrown equivalent of RPA. And at some point in time, towards like 2015, 2016, standalone companies started emerging around the RPA platform. So the whole practice of robotic process automation actually became a full-fledged software industry with those technology with firms like UiPath, Blue Prism, Automation Anyway. Anyway, we'll get into those technologies in a little bit. So why RPA? So essentially, RPA So why would you consider RPA? Cost savings is pretty much one of the biggest drivers for RPA, and it is essentially one of the biggest, use cases in RPA, because RPA is easily one of those transformation initiatives where you can actually substitute labor with machine on an FTE reduction basis. So essentially, cost savings has always been one of the major drivers of RPA. Next, you also talk about higher levels of accuracy. Just because RPA is programmed once and repeats the same activities once it's been programmed correctly, the level of accuracy with RPA is typically extremely high. So according to a research by Forrester, as an example, there's a 57% reduction in error rates by RPA as opposed to activities performed manually by humans. Next is resilience. RPA is extremely resilient because the fatigue that typically accompanies activities by human beings, which are done over a long stretch of time, we as human beings, we need to take coffee breaks, we need to take a few breaks just to keep that concentration level high. With RPA, that resilience is there. So RPA will run pretty much 24/7, except for whatever downtime you need for system refreshes. RPA will consistently run with those activities without that fatigue that comes with normal human activity. Next is improved compliance. So essentially, with human activities again, there's always a potential for variation in those activities when the same individual performs the same activity multiple times. But however, with RPA, because it's been programmed to perform the same activity continuously in the same way, that level of consistency is always guaranteed. So essentially, RPA ensures that your audit trail is always going to give you the same result from execution to execution. And actually, according to another survey by Deloitte, 92% of respondents agree that RPA has met or exceeded their expectations for better compliance. Other factors to consider include accelerated transformation. Because RPA pretty much, involves little or no involvement from the IT organization, there is the ability to deliver transformation at a much more accelerated rate. And also with the fact that you're moving the mundane, manual, repetitive activities away from humans and moving them to machines, you're able to increase the value you get from your personnel and achieve greater productivity. Next slide, please. Now we're going to talk about some of the terms you're going to hear a lot with RPA as RPA. Did you? Okay. Okay, so when do we use RPA? So essentially, RPA has traditionally been used to drive transactions that are high volume, business rule driven, repeatable. So essentially, once it's a predictable activity, it's got a well-defined set of business rules and it's high volume, RPA typically makes a very good use case for this type of scenarios. But as time has kind of evolved, we are now seeing an intersection of RPA with artificial intelligence. So we're seeing a lot more cognitive processes. We're seeing a lot more cognitive processes that are being embedded in RPA. So you're going to see features like improved OCR, image recognition, natural language processing capabilities that are now being embedded as part of the standard offering with our regular RPA solutions. Next slide, please. So now let's talk about some of the frequent terms you're going to hear often these days. So one of the terms that's used frequently is low code, no code. So essentially, we're all familiar with the way software development has always worked. You would learn a programming language. If it was back in the 70s, you learn like COBOL, Fortran. Later on, we started getting into object-oriented languages. So we all associated software development with a form of code writing. what RPA has began to do is introduce what we call visual-based programming. So essentially, the software developers are beginning to introduce more like a drag and drop GUI, and they are also introducing pre-developed packages. So as an example, in UiPath, when you are building a program through what they call, Studio X, which is what they've developed, which is what they've introduced for like the low code, no code. You have like an Excel module in there. Once you pull Excel in, you're going to see all the normal Excel functions that we're used to, VLOOKUP, some if, and all those functions. So you just drag and drop them in and use them as you want to. Next slide, please. Next is citizen developer. So what is a citizen developer? So essentially, it is a persona, it is not a role. And what it typically refers to is somebody that has been authorized and empowered by the organization to develop programs either for their own individual use or for the use of their extended team or other members of the organization. The key takeaway here is the citizen developer does not belong to the IT organization. They belong to a business function. And so essentially, a citizen developer could be in purchasing, could be in finance, could be in HR. So essentially, once you've picked your tool and you've trained the citizen developers, they are then able to develop and deploy this code within a set of governance rules. Next slide, please. So next is human in the loop. So as RPA has begun to get a lot more complex and moving away from the rule-based repetitive activities, we are now beginning to deploy RPA to deploy more complex solutions, which include complex decision making, interacting with customers, handling multiple exceptions. So at a point in time, you want to train the robot to understand the right decisions to make. So humans are inserted in the middle of those RPA programs. So that is what is called human in the loop. So the RPA programs will execute, they'll get to a breakpoint where there's an exception. A human being will pick it up from that breakpoint, make a decision, and then hand it off back to the bot. And as we have kind of evolved, so as the robot learns more and more from the activities of those humans in the loop, it then begins to make decisions by itself, and you can begin to reduce the degree of human in the loop in that process. Next slide, please. Next is Automation Center of Excellence. So given that RPA is software that is run on enterprise systems and has implications if it's not properly controlled, at times you have to think of those robots almost like digital employees. There are times you introduce the employees, there are times you do performance appraisal, and there are times you either retire the employees. So that's the same way you ought to consider those digital robots. There has to be a process for bringing them on board. There has to be a process for evaluating them to see if they need to be enhanced or updated. And then there has to be a process to also evaluate whether they are still relevant or there are other developments that have kind of, emerged in the business space that has kind of rendered them redundant. So a center of excellence really is the governance entity that kind of manages the structure of how you deploy automation within the enterprise. Next slide. Okay, now we're up to our first polling questions. So as Brittany mentioned, you're going to see a polling question come up. So same thing as the slide you're seeing on the screen here. So please take some time to answer your polling questions. Brittany, how are we doing on the polling questions?
We're doing good. We have about 29 responses.
Oh, great.
Okay, I'll go ahead and close it.
Okay, next slide, please. So I'm going to hand it over to Sangita at this point in time.
All right. Thank you, Tolu. Um, I think as we kind of went over some of the basic aspects of what RPA is and what technology supports this RPA solution, we wanted to bring in few more insights on the technology solution. So can we go to the next slide, Brittany? So we know that in the market we have so many different options, right? Some of them are very well established, and some of them are still around and coming up. So the selecting the right RPA platform might seem really daunting, as you kind of get on this path. Now, as you research this landscape, what Gartner provides is the Magic Quadrant. I think most of you are probably familiar with this one yearly. They provide Gartner Magic Quadrant view of many different leading solutions in the industry. Um, and the way they divide this is into four different categories: leaders, challengers, visionary, and niche players. Leaders are typically the one that execute well against their current vision, and then they are well positioned for tomorrow. The technologies like UiPath, Blue Prism, Automation Anywhere, and Microsoft, along with NICE, are in the leaders category. And I think most of you are probably familiar if you have heard about the RPA. Now, as you have some of these in challengers and niche player, but then there are visionaries, um, like Pega, SAP, Salesforce, and Appian. They understand the market where it is going, and they have a vision, and they are building um, for the solution, even if they are not very well established. They are considered as visionaries, and then definitely you have challengers, and then you have niche players. They are really focused on small segment. Let's move on to the next slide. Now, what I kind of brought to you is some comparison at very high level, just to give you more technology view. If you are interested in getting into any of these uh, the leaders categories of technologies, they have a free trial version. Typically, Blue Prism provides free trial version, which is cloud, or it can be on your local machine. um, UiPath do provide free edition both for trial and for license based. And then Automation Anywhere has a community version of it. From the technology perspective, what they use is Blue Prism uses C Sharp, which is a modern language, very easy. We kind of heard about not needing to do a lot of coding and not needing to have a lot of programming skills. But these products are built on some sort of programming skills. And C Sharp is what is used by Blue Prism along with Java. UiPath is using SharePoint, Kibana, and Elasticsearch. And Automation Anywhere uses modern Java. Now, from the designer perspective, I think that's where the front end and designing of the RPA, and we went through this. They use Visual Basic Objects, which is VBO, in the Blue Prism. And then similarly in UiPath, you have Visual Process Designer with developer friendly options. And in Automation Anywhere, you have developer friendly option with the visual interface, which builds for business users, as well as you have capabilities for the advanced developers, if you want to consider advanced capabilities there. Now, how do you kind of access this? Blue Prism has really browser based solution, whereas the other two provides you option to use mobile along with the browser. Now, micro recorder could be a really helpful capability when it comes to one of these solutions. A Blue Prism, unfortunately, do not offer this capability yet, but then others, they do have this capability, which really helps you do the recording of all the steps that you need to take, and and consider for automations. So UiPath uh, has this capability along with Automation Anywhere, where this capability is really universal. um, from the architecture perspective, something very important to also learn, which is client server architecture, and the first two categories, and then Automation Anywhere has a cloud native web based microservices architecture. Let's go to the next slide. From the just a second. Learning perspective, um, there are free trainings that are available. There are a lot of contents that are available online, which you can choose to get to in all of these three categories. um, Automation Anywhere does provide these friendly use community based capabilities, where learning is based on the community. You can interact with many different people. From the bots perspective, if you look at, um, Blue Prism has back office automation only, and which is something like finance processes, where UiPath and Automation Anywhere can offer front office and back office automation both. And if you think about the front office automation, which is could be something like interacting with customers, right? Facing something outside of your organization and identifying solutions that may intervene with some of the manual work. So that's how uh, type of bots you can build and what they are famous from. From operating perspective, Blue Prism offers desktop, web-based, and Citrix automation, whereas UiPath is strong in Citrix automation, so virtual desktops. And if you are in the BPO environment, this is very effective. Also, Automation Anywhere is strong in Citrix automation with AI sense technology. Now, reusability, as Tolu talked about, center of excellence, right, and monitoring, this kind of comes in really handy. On Blue Prism, you have libraries that can be reused across multiple methods, whereas UiPath consists of services and modules that can be reused over the period of time. And in Automation Anywhere, every bot created is reusable. A bot store has hundreds of pre-configured bots. That's something that you might want to consider. From the pricing perspective, this is just the indication. Blue Prism tend to be a little bit on the higher side, whereas UiPath starts really aggressively attractive price, initially, and then over the period of time, Automation Anywhere, uh, if you have it for long term, the ownership might be even lower than the others. They all have certifications available online, and they are very easy to get trained on and obtain the certification on. So that's about some of the key features. Beside that, of course, there are several capabilities that are offered by these technologies. As you kind of go into the market, you definitely can look into from the security perspective. I don't have it listed here, like Prism is quite secured if you're really concerned about the securities compared to the others. Just a few of the key nuggets of what technologies mean. Brittany, can we go to the next slide? So we can go ahead and launch the second polling question.
All right, we got some responses rolling in. I'll give it another minute. Okay, I'll go ahead and close it.
Thank you. So we can move to next section. All right. So what I want to do next is take you through about three case studies that I have picked up to just walk through based on RGP's experience. The first one is regarding reconciliation solutions. Now, this is for the SaaS client. They had failed multiple times to automate their account reconciliations. The company's accounting team had to perform thousands of account reconciliations every month. This was due to their geographic centric account structure. Now, further, data was slow to trickle in, and they sometimes had to perform double or triple times of this manual work, or even like a rework was involved. After a company's internal effort failed, they even had one of the big fours consulting help them implement with solution. And what happened is even this polish solution seemed like what was implemented was not scalable. Um, so they brought in RGP, and along with RGP and our alliance partner, we developed a two-step solution for them. Um, using RPA. The first is we empower the accounting team to create the reconciliation work instructions in a simple Excel book. In turn, the bot reads the Excel file that explains how the recons are to be performed, and then it churns out in few hours what took the accounting team several days to perform this reconciliation. And of course, the rework was no issue because we just kind of heard about bot being able to work 24/7. So if there were new accounts that came in or trickle down, and there was more work, but of course could pick it up. So this was a really great achievement, as we really ended up seeing that sometimes it's just not only automation. We know that underneath the process and design of the process plays a key role in automation, and that's kind of a really good example of how you kind of think about automating your process when you really deploy this RPA solution. Brittany, let's go to the next case. So next case study is about the electric utility company. We met this client in a webinar just like this one, and they had a few concerns with their business. Their process is very manual, and none of the core systems had much in the way of obvious automation capability. Now, their workforce was aging, with many approaching retirements, and they were concerned with their ability to transfer knowledge to the new employees. Now, the solution that RGP helped them build by working with them is identifying processes that led themselves to automation, starting first in finance and accounting and then moving to the supply chain area. Now we are working across 9 to 10 different departments, and I had to have automated something like about 40 processes. Um, Now, success of this program is definitely has taken the notice by at board level, and is really returning. As we saw, cost is the first benefit of this one. Is returning about 7 figures in the savings. And then let's move on to the next one. And last case, we brought to you from a client who was struggling with applying their inbound payments. This is regarding accounts reconciliation. Um, this complex series of bank and accounts they had in SAP environment. Their customers were retailers, so they were large companies. So it was very difficult to influence them, the way they they send the remittances and the way they were making payments. Now the solution, definitely we analyzed the current state processes and came up with a means to automate the matching process. um, they use RPA to read the banks and remittance files and apply that to the AR payments. Now, freeing up definitely working capital, right? That's what would come from applying timely remittances or the payments in the AR side. This was their first use case, which far exceeded their expectations. Since then, they have engaged us to develop a series of automation, which is helping in the controllership space. Not only saving really manual processing time, but in recovering hard dollar savings by reducing chargeback from customers. Um, so that's the third business case. It brings us down to the next slide, Brittany. The next third polling question.
Okay, we're starting to get most of our responses in. I'll give it a few more seconds. Okay, I'll go ahead and close this one out.
Okay, sounds good. All right, let's move on to the next section. I'll hand over Tolu back to cover the next section on organization.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sangita. So just a recap of where we are at right now. We started off with a definition of RPA. We got to understand some of the common terms used in RPA. We understood the use cases as being mostly starting with rule-based repetitive activities and gradually migrating to cognitive automation-driven activities. Next, Sangita walked us through the major RPA technology platforms out there, and then she walked us through some examples of some use cases out there. So now let's talk about charting your automation roadmap. So first of all, I want to say this is a maturity level that demonstrates an ideal progression, but this maturity level is not necessarily linear. It is all driven by the catalyst that is driving the move to RPA. So if there's a burning platform or there's a burning compliance issue, then that pretty much, is what drives that adoption to RPA. So as an example, in one of the biggest use cases we've seen is around invoice automation in accounts payable. So there was a scenario where a client had a lot of backlog invoice issues, multiple duplicate payments, and reputational issues with missed payments, delayed payments. So it got to a point where accounts payable was a burning platform and they needed to quickly clear their backlog of invoices. So accounts payable pretty much started as the catalyst to deploy automation. And in the example Sangita just gave us as well, there was a situation where there was backlog in cash application. So that essentially drove the adoption of RPA. So now let's just walk through this linear progression. So typically, it starts from new and proven RPA, right? So this may be at an enterprise level, it may be at a divisional level, or it may be at a departmental level. So there's a realization to deploy RPA, and somebody leads that, deployment, that program. So it may be a department head, it may be in this case head of accounts payable, it may be the CFO, or it may be really somebody much higher at the organizational hierarchy level. Anyway, somebody actually starts up as being the sponsor, and then there is a pilot that is deployed. And so typically there's a lot of thought that is given to selecting that pilot, because you want to demonstrate your best case for success initially. And so there's a lot of thought given to selecting a pilot. You select a software vendor, and then you develop and launch that pilot. So once you've launched the pilot, you've gotten a level of adoption and stability with the platform, and there's an acknowledgement to the value RPA is delivering to the organization. You move beyond the pilot, and you want to establish RPA within the enterprise. At this point, you want to define an automation operating model, because just as you regulate which employees, HR hires into your organization, you do a background check, you do the interview, you establish credentials, you give them badges. So essentially it's the same way. You need to have a way to regulate which robots are running rampant in your organization. Otherwise, you will just have, robots, without control, governance, and, working at cross purposes. So automation operating model is essentially where you define how do you want to approach automation. Do you want to have a centralized approach where essentially you centralize all the automation development? Or do you want to have more of a federated approach where maybe you divisionalize, maybe it's by business unit? Or do you want to have, a departmental level where essentially you kind of let each department regulate how they develop automation? But it is essential that you establish an automation operating model, and then you define it and it's clearly established. So once you go past this establishment phase, then you're getting to expand. So now you're getting to scale automation. At this point, orchestration is necessary, because you want to make sure that you're coordinating all the different bots that are happening in the organization. So at this point, you start considering what we call a center of excellence. And we went through a definition of what a center of excellence is earlier on. So at this point, you're defining an automation center of excellence. You're establishing a framework for formalizing funding, establishing an ideation process, an intake process, a prioritization process, and that essentially forms the expand level of your automation. Then finally, once you're at that expand level, you're ready to scale. And at that point, you start thinking about establishing programs like citizen developers, having, non-IT developers deploy automation within some clear boundaries and framework. So as we can see, it's a progression, but again, it's not necessarily linear, because you could start from establishing an automation center of excellence and driving that framework downwards, beginning to launch the pilot, starting with the automation center of excellence. So I think we can move to the next slide. And then this is representative. So as you can see here, it shows an 8-week deployment timeline. But again, this is just representative, and It one depends on the maturity level of the organization. So at times, if you're launching your pilot, you may end up launching your pilot in 12 weeks just because the organization is just, getting their feet wet in that, journey. And as you launch your pilot and start adding more automation, you could deploy automation in as little as 4 weeks or 6 weeks. It's all, question of maturity. And as you kind of progress, so you have a range that could go from 4 weeks to 12 weeks or more, depending on the complexity of the automation. And those are the activities you will typically see. So in the readiness phase, you're getting the software installed, you're onboarding the project team, then you move into the design stage where you're bringing in the subject matter experts, training the project team, understanding the process walkthrough. Then you build and test by building the bots, developing the bots, and running your test scripts, your user acceptance test scripts. Then from go live, you deploy, and then you hand over to operations, and then you want to capture your benefit realization from your business case going forward. Next slide, please. Now, let's talk about change management. So change management really is the elephant in the room because it's the elephant that if you sidestep, it will come back to bite you. And that's because, like I mentioned earlier on, RPA is one of the few transformation initiatives that are justified by hard FTE savings. So you see scenarios where when you introduce or implement invoice automation in accounts payable, you could quickly go, depending on the size and scale of the organization, you could quickly go from 60 account payable operators to 10 or 12 or even less. And so RPA pays for itself. But again, you're going to ask yourself, and your employees are going to ask themselves, if RPA is going to deliver efficiencies that take us from 60 accounts payable operators to 10, what's going to happen to the remaining 50? And then what you don't want to have is your best employees dusting their resumes and being like, I don't want to be one of those 50s at the tail end, so let me just be on the move. So you got to manage this effectively with change management. And necessarily, there's opportunities for cross-training, for moving people into other positions. And, but change management is really key as a part of robotic process automation deployment. And as we can see, the definition of change management up there, it is preparing, equipping, and supporting individuals to successfully adopt change in order to drive organizational success and outcomes. Let's move to the next slide, please. So again, like I said, why is change management important? It helps to calm the resistance and fears that normally accompany any indication to employees that there could be a potential reduction of workforce in the offing. So as the project sponsor, there is a huge expectation to address the HR implication of this RPA deployment, handle the headcount implication in a transparent manner, partner with stakeholders, understand what the before the current and future staffing model will be, and actively engage the human resources organization in this RPA adoption. So bringing it home now, I think we're down to the next few slides. So next we're going to have a polling questions, and I think that is going to be followed by a couple of questions. So let's get into polling question number 4. So Brittany, can you please launch the polling question?
Okay, we got some responses rolling in, so I'll give that a few more seconds. Okay, I will go ahead and close our poll.
Okay, so time to take questions. So, Brittany, if you just quickly go over the method to post questions again, so we can start taking questions as they come in.
Yes, of course. So, um, if you all have any questions, please type them into the Q&A tab of the chat, and our speakers will get to those. So we'll give everybody a few minutes. I know there's a little bit of a delay.
So, I see the first question coming in here, which is asking, I see you've gone through a number of solution options. How do I select the right option without engaging a consulting company or consulting to do this? So that's a good question. So um, going back to the options Sangita walked us through, she kind of summarized from the Gartner list. So Gartner has way more than the four options that Sangita highlighted there. But then Sangita just selected the four most popular options right there from the leader list. So it depends on your size of organization and your role in deploying RPA. So if, as an example, you are in the finance department, there's no big organizational mandate, or you're in a small firm and you wanted to test the waters with automation, Microsoft Power Automate is pretty much being embedded into Microsoft Office Suite by Microsoft. So essentially, it almost comes as a free non-user licensed solution as part of your Office Suite. So that's a very good area to start off if you are not undertaking a robust RPA initiative. You've got limited budget. You want to just go with a quick and, for lack of a better description, quick and dirty solution. You can start with, Power Automate, get your feet wet there, and they also have, a sort of citizen developer type approach where you can do drag and drop with the cloud platform. So that's a good option. But if you've got the opportunity to evaluate, these other vendors will typically, once you go to their website and ask for an inquiry, they're very, very willing to do a demo for you. So all you need to do is just go to this software vendor website, UiPath, Blue Prism, Automation Anywhere, and even Microsoft Power Automate, and request for a demo. And then based on the response from that demo, you can evaluate, and you can post, the use cases that you're contemplating to them, and just help them also guide you in that selection. Any other questions?
No more questions at the moment. I'll give it a couple more minutes here.
And then regarding instructions for CPE credits, I know the members of Illinois CPA Society here as well, so some of them may be very familiar with the way to go about getting CPE credits for this from this webinar. But there are also attendees that are not regular members of Illinois CPA Society. So Brittany, could you also please explain the process to get CPE credit for this webinar?
Yes, so the tracking questions that you clicked on throughout the webinar, if you responded to 75% of those tracking questions, then you'll receive your CPE certificate.
Thank you.
And doesn't look like we have any questions here. Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much, Tolu and Sangita, for your time today. Great presentation.
Thank you.
Yes. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today online. Don't forget that you'll receive an email within 24 hours to take your survey. So once you submit your survey, then you'll receive your CPE credits. And then Tolu and Sangita's information is here on the screen. So if you have any questions, you can reach out to them there, and I will leave this screen up for a while. Otherwise, everyone have a great rest of your morning and afternoon, and have a great rest of your week as well. Thank you all.
Thank you, Brittany. Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.